Hey everybody, Casey here with Life Abstract Gaming, and today I want to talk about TV. We recently got the Season 7 finale of The Walking Dead, so let's talk about it. The season overall has been sort of a downer, not in terms of quality, but definitely in its tone. It started, as we all know, with the extremely gruesome deaths of major characters so major that they're mentioned nearly every other episode throughout the rest of the season. I don't see anybody still broken up over Noah. But it makes sense. Glenn was with the group from the very beginning and leaves behind a pregnant wife, while Abraham leaves behind not one, but two women who are deeply in love with him. It's no shock that their absences will inform almost all of the actions of the ones left alive going forward. But really quick, I just want to compare the differences in the way Maggie, Sasha, and Rosita seem to deal with their grief. Maggie by far seemed the strongest in terms of moving forward. I personally think it has to do with a number of things. Mainly that she's pregnant and needs to think of the future as opposed to her past for the sake of her child, and to a lesser extent, she's already grieved Glenn's death before. Of course, I'm referring to the infamous fake out in season 6, where we think Glenn was killed before we find out that he Houdini'd his way out of an alley packed full of walkers. Sasha was struggling with moving past Abraham's death, as we've seen her struggle in the past when people close to her die, specifically her brother Tyrese. She pretty much became suicidal at that point and would purposefully put herself in harm's way. Abraham was actually instrumental in bringing her back to a place of peace. But instead of Sasha falling apart again, I think she had by then learned to keep moving forward for the sake of those who die. Which is a stark contrast to Rosita, who I believe since her introduction hasn't lost anybody so directly linked to her. Abraham was her boyfriend first, and she was completely blindsided by his decision to break up with her for Sasha, only to watch him die shortly thereafter. Rosita is an emotional wreck on the inside, but her character is very shelled off. She internalizes a lot of her grief and rage, which is why I think she's constantly snapping at whoever's trying to calm her down. Similarly to Sasha in the past, Rosita now has a death wish, but she also needs revenge, which is what's fueling her reckless, and let's face it, selfish attempts at killing Negan on her own. Okay, so from this point forward, I'm going to start going into more detail regarding season-ending events and the finale episode itself, so here's your spoiler warning. Before I get into specifics of the last episode, I just want to highlight two character arcs that I really enjoyed watching, though they both were pretty frustrating to watch at times. Morgan and Carol are introduced to one another at very opposing points of their lives. Morgan is a pacifist that still sees value in the lives of all people no matter what they've done. He believes they can be brought back from their evil as long as they stay alive. Whereas Carol has become almost unfeeling and convinced that the only sure way to protect the people that you care about are to eliminate any and all threats to them immediately. So it's almost like clockwork that they both end up together while away from Alexandria. What I think is so interesting about it though is that we all know Morgan wasn't always like this. It took a lot of training from a person who held the beliefs he now shares to bring Morgan back from the indiscriminate killing machine he had become after succumbing to his grief and isolation. We actually see that Carol reaches a point where she's losing herself to the same kind of bloodlust that Morgan had to beat back. I think Morgan sees that, and that's part of why he reaches out to her. Sadly, due to the death of Morgan's protege Benjamin, not only does he have a new close friend to grieve, but it tears open the grief he still holds for his son Dwayne. It can be left up to interpretation that Morgan decided to kill Richard to regain the Savior's trust and to plan their counterattack like Richard wanted. But even though his actions fell in line with that plan, I'm more convinced that Morgan snapped and just exacted revenge. Carol at this point sees the monster in Morgan that she was trying to fight back in herself, and I think they become closer for it, in a way sort of calming the anger of the other rather than just for themselves. Now the big stuff. Rick's rebellion. While the first half of the season was all about Negan's oppressive rule over all the known survivor camps, the second half was about bringing all these different groups together to finally fight back. It was a slow build, but it allowed a lot of smaller characters to shine in their own episodes, like Tara, who seemed all but forgotten in most cases, but her Oceanside adventure finally came back into relevance and helped Alexandria get rearmed for the uprising. The scavenger group that Rick makes a deal with never sat well with me, not in the sense that I couldn't trust them, because I did, but how much time we need to pass by before a group of people that large start talking like aliens and forgetting social norms like asking to sleep with somebody's boyfriend right in their face. Their entire behavior just seems oddly out of place in what's otherwise a very grounded and albeit fantastical world. That being said, I did not see their betrayal coming. I was super hyped that the fight was going to start, and that moment when all the scavengers turned their guns on the Alexandrians was truly heartbreaking. That familiar helplessness was written all over Rick's face once again, so I really want to emphasize how impressed I was with how the writers gave Rick's group a fighting chance with Sasha's sacrifice. I initially questioned why Sasha would lock Rosita out of the Savior compound and go in alone. I didn't buy that Sasha was all that concerned with Rosita's life when she was well aware of the pain Rosita felt and how she was aiming to sacrifice her life in killing Negan the same way Sasha was. Now that I see it was basically just to set up Sasha's zombie attack from the casket, I can appreciate the end result being awesome enough to justify the small loss of logic earlier. It's upsetting that Sasha needed to die, but it was on her terms, and she was able to use her death as both a weapon against Negan and a shield to stop him from using her as leverage against her friends. It allowed the first battle against the Saviors to actually begin, and with support from the Kingdom and the Hilltop, Alexandria actually won that battle by pushing Negan and the Scavengers out for the time being. Both sides are now going to need to regroup, and all-out war has been declared. So, how do you guys feel about the finale episode, or Season 7 in general? What characters do you think will step up on both sides to try and win the coming war, and what do you think the Survivor Alliance will be able to do against Negan, who still has a much larger army to fight with? Let us know. We're listening.